in this section, we call it the Policy Ponder Party. And today it's actually very, very appropriate because of what happened today. And I think you can talk about the relationship between the CBA and Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada in terms of policy relations, in terms of policy discussions and submissions. We can also talk about technology, because I know that that's something that really interests you. And,
Yeah.
in the world of DIYing
Yeah.
things, I think this is very important to highlight. So, Will, why don't you start it off with the first point?
All right. So, Mark, in today's immigration practice, where most people don't see it necessary to hire a lawyer, or they're messaging saying that, individuals shouldn't hire lawyers, what should clients know about the current systems and the coming changes?
Yeah. So one of the most important things, like I love it when people are engaged in their own applications. Like that's where really you can create something that you know is going to get approved. The challenge I have is when people are not engaged and they say, "Oh, here, just do it for me," right? And so I'm never concerned about people who want to do it themselves. And my goodness, if there's anything that we want to learn how to do, what do? We go to YouTube and search it up, right? And there's something that tells us how to do just about everything. And as we always talk about, what can you trust and what can't you? And one of the biggest dangers that I see with people who just want to do it themselves, and it's not themselves, it never is. They're relying on hundreds of hours of research on Facebook pages, on forums, on WhatsApp groups. That's where they're getting their information. So no one's ever doing it on their own. But what happens is you have some people who successfully immigrate and they are then in a position where they think, I know how to do it. So now I'm going to explain to everybody else how you can do it yourself and you don't need help from anyone else. But there's one factor that no one considers. The officer reviewing that application could have overlooked something, could have made a mistake and approved it. And then this person feels like this, and I've had so many examples, I won't go into it, but so many examples of where people have relied on someone else's advice because they did it the way they did it. And then another officer who has a clue, who wasn't overwhelmed that day, realizes, oh, wait a minute, this isn't right. And then refuses the application. And then where do you have to go? So for me, there's no problems with wanting to do it on your own and having control. And that's kind of what I've married with my offering, is to really partner with people that want to learn, and I teach them and educate them. And then when we do it together, oh my goodness, things don't get missed. Not like when there's these silos of unknown between a paralegal and the client and you and deadlines. And so for people who want to do it on their own, the thing that an immigration lawyer gives, well, we've talked about it and we don't need to be kind of patting ourselves on the back. It's a hard slug to get through law school, and you have to have a certain level of ability to get there in the first place. But then after you're through, then that's where the separation is. And I think most immigration lawyers are not in it for the money, Will. And Lou, you can attest to this too. Like, we're not some rich guys running around with our money falling out of our pockets. We do this because of the rewards that come that are non-monetary. And we do it because we love making a difference in people's lives. So, the money grubbing lawyer concept really doesn't apply very well to us, especially when we know what other representatives charge that are quite comparable to what we do. But for people who want to do it themselves, the advantage to using a lawyer is that you've got someone who really understands the law, not just learning off of the backs of previous clients or trying to use their experience to teach you. We can actually read the law, understand it, interpret it, and then understand also if an officer makes the wrong decision and refuses your application. We don't accept that. We don't say, oh, that's too bad, resubmit. We're like, screw that, that's wrong. Okay, here's what we're going to do to push back, right? But I think ultimately people who do understand the value of a lawyer, I think they get it. And people who I found traditionally that want to do it themselves have just never really had any other alternatives. It's either give everything to the lawyer and don't really have any involvement in the application, or do it myself. And that's the difference. That's what I'm trying to change, is to say, no, there's actually a happy medium right in between where you get the best of both worlds. So,
Mark, a quick follow-up question to that, and then I'll let LJ ask a question too. Right now, one of the big challenges of doing the work that you do, which is incredible, we are up, clients are meeting us. They're not going through agents. They're not going through assistants. They're not going through surveys to ask questions or questionnaires. You're providing that advice to them. But we're also doing work that is traditionally called review work, where we don't, take full representation and the clients are submitting on their own with our guidance and advice. What would your recommendation to IRCC be about making the system better and frankly, allowing it to conform more with our ethics codes and with all the things that exist in our practice?
Yeah. So we've seen a real trend, Will, for immigration to kind of consider representatives as an afterthought. We've seen a lot of changes with the online citizenship, the landing portals, a lot of things that are now moving. Even Alberta, like our immigrant nominee program, is completely cut out representatives. And so there's a real trend towards that. Now, there's a lot of reasons why that's happening. A lot of reasons. And I'm not going to get into some of the more controversial ones, at least that we as lawyers feel are contributing to the problem. But the reality is for immigration, they need to understand that we are an integral part of the process and we actually make their lives easier. When people come through us, we can screen people out that don't have a chance. So they're not submitting applications that really don't have any chance of success. And so that's one advantage, but also putting together a well-prepared application is a critical component to making an officer's life easy. And I think sometimes, and it's hard with lawyers too, because we're the ones that are on the other side of the trench in the trench warfare, right? Because when we don't see something going kind of the way that we think should be for our clients, we make their life a little bit more difficult. And so that creates this tension between us sometimes and the officers. And sometimes we can be arrogant too, Will. Like, we can really be arrogant when we think we understand the law better than the officer, and we take great pains to demonstrate to them that they don't know what they're doing. That's not a good recipe for a good working relationship. And so we've created it ourselves sometimes, just being a little bit overbearing, I guess, in how we approach things. We could be a little nicer, I think, as lawyers, and you'd be amazed at being kind, like how far it gets you with the most crotchety, angry, just almost borderline abusive border officer. Like when you're just kind, it's amazing how they kind of soften, but not always taught to be that, right? So.
Absolutely. I was just saying that I think there is a huge access to justice role played by lawyers who help out on specific parts in limited scope retainers. And I think that the system can do a better job in helping us facilitate this important work. Because even right now, with the discussion of whether to include the use of representative form or not, and whether the client themselves has to disclose. In some cases, they don't want to disclose that they saw a lawyer, right? And they want to do it themselves with just a little bit of input. So I think that there's ways that the system can also help facilitate.
It's interesting. A great colleague, I won't mention her by name, but she just recently showed me what she does on her use of representative forms, and I loved it and I adopted it. And basically, she literally lists right in there on top of the form, I am not a representative. I provided consultative advice, and she doesn't even sign the form. And by the email address, she says, do not send any correspondence. I am not representing this individual, but I'm disclosing that they consulted with me. It was a brilliant idea because, over the last little while, especially as we've transitioned to more of a review model, I'm getting all the correspondence for all my spousal sponsorships that we reviewed and submitted, and I included a use of rep. And even though all the correspondence was supposed to go to the client, it's now coming to me, and that's fine. So now I'm just, unpaid kind of pro bono. Here's the next step. And, but I've learned there's little tricks that you can use to try to clarify to them that distinction. So.
Yeah, to circle back to Will's point earlier, and I think really rounds it up perfectly. We were talking about that when we were writing the script for this episode. That is interesting that the representative system with IRCC kind of looks at it from a binary perspective, whether you're in or you're out. I think that's kind of like where Will was going with this question. What are your thoughts on like essentially creating that gray zone within IRCC, Mark?
Yeah. Guys, I don't know if I have an answer for that. I'll be honest. with the whole nature of how we practice, there are so many different ways in which you can represent and support a client to get the result they want. And, as I look at, even within Express Entry itself, the ability that we have to communicate, the challenges that we've had with the web form updates and use of reps being rejected. This is something that we've discussed directly with Minister Menachino in our CBA executive meetings that we've had with him, and so I know that they're wrestling with crappy representatives,
Mhm.
people who are exploiting others.
Mhm.
And when I look at all of this, trying to find that balance, I don't know if I have the right answer. I don't know if I can, you know, yeah, I don't think I can. That's one I can give you guys a really solid answer.
But that's the answer, Mark. I think
Lost.
it's just that it's complicated. Like that,
Yeah.
the reality is you can't just like give a straight answer to that because you're right. They're wrestling with a lot of different issues, different perspectives, and you have to balance that.
Yeah.
But let's shift a little bit, actually. So if you were able to identify three of the biggest pain points that IRCC would have, whether it's regarding technology, operations, and you were given a free hand, what would you do?
These policy questions, I'll tell you, you know, a free hand to make changes within immigration. One of the things that I would do would be to open up communication. That's the first thing.
Mhm.
So there's been this massive push to cut off all lines of communication in order to improve efficiency, expedite processing. And I understand that when there's a cost to having people available. But my goodness, when I look at the train wreck that's happened this past year, whether it's spousals or other things like that, where, there's been applications that have been refused improperly, people have fallen out of status, their ability to work, all these things, because of what happened with the paper applications being shelved in boxes. It just, when I look at that, I don't know. That's first and foremost. That's one thing that, without a doubt, I would open up those lines. And I can still remember when Kenny at the time decided to close all the smaller offices. It was all part of this centralization. And even the office in Lethbridge, we had an immigration office here, and they closed that and centralized it to Calgary. But I think that's one thing that I would change, is open up an ability for people to actually communicate. Because I think in the long run, like, I don't think the expediency is worth it. I don't really think it is. And so, yeah, for sure, that would be one thing. And there, you've got so many things on this wish list that you'd like to see different. Personally, I wish there wasn't so much animosity between council and the stakeholders in immigration. We've come a long way with the department these days, a long way. Our relationship has never been better with them. But I think collaborating and working together with stakeholders and really listening to them
Mhm.
makes a huge, huge difference when it comes to the development of solid, reliable policy to drive the ship. And sometimes when decisions are made in a vacuum without consulting with people that are on the ground, I think things are missed, and then it creates more problems sometimes than if they would have just
Yeah.
just sought advice and direction. And it's interesting because I guess I should probably say with that advice that that immigration should continue down the trend that they're going, because they really have,
Mm.
guys, they really have been good and very open, and full marks for them. IRCC, CBSA, not so much. And
Mhm.
I've got my own kind of feelings on why they tend to be a little bit more closed off, but I think generally speaking, those are two things anyways that I personally would like. There's so many things you could pick out and you could pull apart within each of the different programs and the ways things are done.
Yeah.
But at a very, very high level, those are two things that I would probably
Mhm.
identify for myself as a wish list.
Wow. Actually, that just reminds me of, like, LJ and I were invited to join a small focus group panel, and we did share a presentation to IRCC policymakers where we shared the very message, Mark, that you said, that communication and accessibility and being able to resolve one's problems. We talked about self reps unable to even submit a web form that is received so that they can fix something they did wrong. Is a problem, and I think they were very receptive to it, and it led to a good conversation, which is what we wanted to do. So, Mark, I think you touched on wonderful points, and we share those as well in our thoughts.
Awesome.